Hello, Happy New Year. I hope you're doing well. This is the time of year where everyone starts making resolutions and plans for things that they want to do over the course of the year. And one big resolution a lot of people make is, I want to read more. And I've been doing bookish stuff online for a number of years now. And the biggest question that I'm asked most often is, how do you read so much? How can I read more? And I've been asked this countless times. I made a video a while ago answering this very question, but as I was getting this question again recently, it got me to thinking like, well, in the past few years, I've really been reading more than I ever have in my life before. I mean, I've always been a reader, but I sat down and started thinking like, well, why is it that I've been reading more? And I came up with three solutions. So I thought I would give them to you as sort of tips or suggestions because it might help you to read more this year as well. So the very first suggestion I have, and which you've probably come across before since you're watching this video, is get involved with the online book community. So if you're watching this video, you've probably stumbled across BookTube or other bookish videos on YouTube, but also, there's Goodreads, the biggest platform for cataloging and sharing what we've been reading, but also the Story Graph. Also, there's Twitter and Instagram or Bookstagram, and people sharing all their thoughts and plans for reading online on all these different various platforms. And I've found that this has actually inspired me to read more, because the more I see people talking about certain books or laying out certain, book plans or reading plans for the next month or year, it really excites me to want to read more myself. And this almost seems counterintuitive. You would think that the more time you spend online, the less you would be reading. But I see it as all part of the reading experience, and it's really enhanced my reading experience, because obviously reading is a solitary activity, but to discuss what you've been reading with other people and hearing other people's thoughts about books has enhanced my reading experience and thoughts about what I've read or what I want to read. Even if I don't agree with some of those opinions, maybe especially if I don't agree with those opinions. So you can get involved with the online bookish community there's a whole spectrum of ways you can get involved. You can just create a Goodreads or a Story Graph account and literally just catalog what you've been reading, maybe give it a star reading, maybe give it a short review, or write some notes or your thoughts about what you've read. Or you could start your own YouTube channel like I've done, or start your own book blog like I did several years ago, or follow more bookish people on Twitter or Instagram or other social media accounts and just see what other people are reading, start interacting and commenting, and you might make some bookish friends as well, and that would be a nice side effect of it. But yeah, I found it's really inspired and motivated me to want to read more as well. So the second suggestion I have is to combine your physical reading experience with an audiobook experience. And something that's really helped me to read a lot more is when I'm at home, or if I'm on a train for a long time, or sat stationary, I'll read a physical book of something, but I'll also get the audiobook of it if there's an audiobook available. And then when I'm out and about, I'm doing grocery shopping or going for a long walk or doing exercise, or if I'm actually in the house doing chores like doing the washing or cleaning or other of these sort of fairly mindless routine tasks, I can listen to an audiobook as well. And then I'm still continuing to read, even though I'm not sat down in a physical location reading. And I know there's a whole debate about, is reading an audiobook actually reading? And I'm not going to get into that whole debate about whether it is or not, except to say that I do think that listening to an audiobook is still reading, but I do agree that it's a different reading experience than just reading the physical book. But as I found, like, combining the physical reading experience with the audio experience, it can change my thoughts about a book, because obviously you get a certain interpretation of a book from an audiobook. So it does give a different dimension to the reading experience, and especially if the audiobook is read by the author themselves, you can really hear how they intended certain lines or certain words or certain dialogue to actually come across. And that can be really interesting and useful to the reading experience, I've found. Now, I know there's a sort of financial limitation to this, because if you're buying a physical book to also buy the audiobook, that makes it a much more expensive reading experience if for a certain book. But I do know, a lot of libraries also have a lending library for audiobooks as well as for physical books. So if you're able to borrow both the physical book and the audiobook, that can make it a free experience or a cheaper experience if you can get one or the other through those means. But if it's a book you really want to read and that you're really going to savor, then I think it is worth the sort of investment of getting both the physical book and the audiobook. Sometimes you might just want to read the physical book and then reread it by listening to the audiobook. And, and it can, like I said, it can give you a whole different dimension to the reading experience. So my third suggestion of how to read more is sort of a sweet one. It's to read aloud with either your partner, your husband or wife, or your children, or other people in your family, or with friends. And that's something that I've been doing a lot more recently, especially since the pandemic happened. I'm spending a lot more time at home just with my partner. I live just with my partner, and we've been reading aloud to each other, and it's a really wonderful joint activity. I mean, part of the issue with reading I've found sometimes is because it's a solitary activity, you're sort of blocking people off and saying, like, stay away. And that experience can be really wonderful and valuable. But if you want to make it a more communal experience, you can read aloud to each other, and that makes it really lovely. And you can also do this even if you just live on your own, because a wonderful thing that happened over Christmas was my cousin Martin, who lives in Boston. He did a Zoom call with 80 or so friends and family, and he read a short story aloud to all of us. And that was such a lovely thing. So you can do video calls with friends or family and read to each other online. And this can be a really wonderful regular activity that you can just build into your life to do every week or every month, to read aloud to each other, especially if, like a lot of us, you've been having a lot more video calls with people over the past year, but don't have anything necessarily new to talk about. A really good thing is to read to each other, because that means that you're still having some social interaction, but you're just reading text, and you can sort of comment upon it, after you stop reading it. And so I thought I would suggest a few books that my partner and I have read aloud to each other that we've really enjoyed, because I know it doesn't always work for all books. There are certain books that I think are better read aloud than others. But because it's been the festive period recently, we've been reading to each other from this anthology called The Penguin Book of Christmas Stories. And it's a whole range of classic Christmas stories, from some really older authors to more contemporary authors. So like it says, from Hans Christian Andersen to Angela Carter. And one lovely thing about going through an anthology is you can physically tick off the stories that you read aloud to each other as you're going along. So you can see that we've ticked off a number of ones from Chekhov and O. Henry, and we read Langston Hughes. That was a really lovely story. And Ray Bradbury, so a really interesting Christmas sci-fi story. There's a story from Muriel Spark and Tove Jansson, the great Scandinavian author. I like to pronounce her name Tove Jansson, which probably isn't the correct way to pronounce it, but I like to say it. And Lucia Berlin, we read a great story from her. And so it's a way of sort of going through a list and enjoying the stories. And one other firm favorite that we love reading aloud to each other is from David Sedaris, because his memorist pieces, stories, are absolutely hilarious, and the humor really comes out when you're reading these stories aloud to each other. I mean, David Sedaris is always doing tours and reading aloud his work, and there's a reason for that, because when you read it aloud, it comes alive, and the humor of it is just so wonderful. And so this is a recent collection of his work, but obviously he's had several books of short stories or his memorist pieces that he's published before. But this is a collected works if you want to start getting into his work. But then there's also surprisingly some classic books I find have been really wonderful to read aloud to each other. So one example is by Anne Bronte, and I have it on my shelf here. It is Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte, and we read this aloud to each other while we were going on a road trip, I found a lot of it really funny, and I don't think I would have found it as funny if I was just sat at home reading it on my own. But yeah, I've really enjoyed reading the Brontes aloud to my partner. And then another surprising classic that we really enjoyed was Don Quixote, and because I know this is quite a big, sort of intimidating book. A lot of these books that we sort of fear getting into because it looks kind of intimidating from the outside. This is another way to sort of get into some of these books and motivate you to want to read more of them. And reading Don Quixote aloud, even though, it's hundreds of years old, but it is absolutely hilarious. We were laughing out loud quite a lot while reading it, and of course it may take months or even years to read the entire book aloud to each other if you're because it's difficult to find times to read aloud to each other, but who cares? There's no rush to read a lot of these books, and if you string it out for that long, it can become a wonderful new tradition and interactive thing to do with each other, and means that reading doesn't have to just be this sort of lonely, solitary activity that you do all on your own. So those are my 3 suggestions. Let me know in the comments if they're helpful, or if you think that you might want to pick any of these up. But let me know if you have any suggestions as well to read more. It's really interesting and helpful to, I think, share these ideas with each other. But I think an important thing to remember as well, it's not the quantity of that you read, but the quality of your reading experience. And I think following a number of these steps can really enhance your reading experience as well as hopefully motivating you to read a bit more. So I hope you have a wonderful reading year, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.